Daniels was a ghost in the underworld, ruthless, elusive, and feared by all. But when he was shot dead in broad daylight, the fragile peace he'd held together shattered instantly, plunging the city into a violent gang war. Behind the bullets and bloodshed, however, a darker game was unfolding. One where betrayal ran deep, and the true puppeteers operated far beyond the streets. This is the story of power, deception, and a deadly fight for control that would change everything. The Daniels gang began as a small group of young men in a neglected neighborhood on the outskirts of a major UK city. In the early days, they were just a loose collection of friends who found themselves drawn into petty crime, stealing cars, running small drug deals, and fighting rival crews. Life was hard in their community, with few opportunities and little hope for the future. The gang offered something no one else could: power, respect, and a sense of belonging. Slowly they built a reputation as troublemakers, but even then, no one could have guessed what they would become. At the center of it all was the man known simply as Daniels. Unlike many gang leaders who were loud and flashy, Daniels was different. He was quiet, calculating, and careful. No one outside the gang knew much about him. He rarely showed his face in public and kept his plans close to his chest. Despite his low profile, his control over the gang was absolute. His word was law, and he demanded complete loyalty. Those who crossed him vanished without explanation, and rumors spread about his brutal methods. Daniels wasn't just a leader, he was a symbol of fear and order in a chaotic world. Under Daniels' guidance, the gang grew quickly. They moved from small-time thefts to more serious and profitable crimes. Drug trafficking became their main source of income. The gang controlled large parts of the city's drug market, supplying everything from heroin to cocaine. This brought them wealth and influence, but also enemies. Other gangs began to see the Daniels gang as a threat. Rival crews who once ignored them started to plan attacks, hoping to take over their territory. Daniels was aware of the danger and tightened security. He surrounded himself with trusted lieutenants and created an extensive network of informants. But the Daniels gang's power didn't come from violence alone. Daniels was clever enough to see that crime alone couldn't guarantee survival. To protect the gang's interests, he built connections beyond the streets. He found ways to influence local politicians, law enforcement officers, and even businessmen. Through bribery, intimidation, and favors, the gang secured protection from police raids and investigation. Some officials looked the other way when evidence pointed to the Daniels gang's activities. Others actively helped them by leaking information or hindering rival gangs' movements. This web of corruption made the gang nearly untouchable, at least for a time. The gang's presence changed the neighborhood. Businesses either closed down or paid heavy protection fees to avoid trouble. Residents lived in fear but also resignation. The police were unable or unwilling to stop the growing criminal empire. Some officers were honest, but the system was broken by the gang's influence. Community leaders tried to speak out, but their voices were drowned by threats and violence. The Daniels gang became a shadow government, ruling the streets with an iron fist. Inside the gang, life was tough but rewarding. Loyalty was everything. Members were expected to follow orders without question, and to keep secrets at all costs. Betrayal was met with brutal punishment. At the same time, Daniels rewarded those who proved themselves. Young men who rose through the ranks gained respect and money. Some even dreamed of becoming the next leader. But beneath the surface, cracks began to form. Rivalries between lieutenants and pressure from outside enemies created tension. Daniels maintained control, but it was a delicate balance. Despite the fear he inspired, Daniels was known to be strategic rather than reckless. He avoided unnecessary violence and preferred to settle conflicts with deals and alliances when possible. This made the gang stronger and allowed them to expand their reach. The city's underworld was shifting, and the Daniels gang was at the center of this change. But with power came risk. Every decision Daniels made affected thousands of lives and set the stage for the violent struggle that was soon to explode. What no one saw coming was that Daniels' greatest threat wasn't from rival gangs or police, but from within. As the gang grew larger and more complicated, secrets and ambitions started to tear at the bonds that held them together. The leader who had built an empire on fear and loyalty was about to face a betrayal that would shatter everything he had created. The story of the Daniels gang was far from over. It was only just beginning. The city was tense, as if everyone sensed a storm gathering on the horizon. For years the Daniels gang had ruled their territory with little opposition, their power growing quietly but steadily. Rival gangs watched from the sidelines, waiting for any sign of weakness to explode. The police presence in the city had increased, but their efforts often felt like a band-aid on a much larger wound. Corruption within the force meant that some officers were either on the gang's payroll or too afraid to take them on directly. The people who lived in neighborhoods controlled by these gangs felt trapped, caught between fear of the criminals and distrust of those meant to protect them. The tension was visible in every corner of the city. On the streets, friends became suspicious of one another. Parents kept their children indoors, afraid of the violence that could erupt at any moment. Shops shuttered early, and markets once bustling with life grew quiet. The gang's influence extended far beyond their criminal acts. It seeped into the daily lives of ordinary citizens, changing how they moved, spoke, and even thought. The feeling was that the city was slowly turning into a battleground, and no one was safe. Among the rival gangs, plans were quietly being made. The Daniels gang's grip on the city was strong, but their growing empire had enemies who believed that power should be theirs. These rival factions were not just angry, they were organized and ready. They watched Daniels and his lieutenants closely, noting every move, every weakness. Some saw the leader's secrecy as a possible vulnerability, others believed that the gang's expansion had stretched their loyalty too thin. Each rival gang hoped to be the one to deliver the fatal blow. The police found themselves in a difficult position. On one hand, there was public pressure to crack down on the gangs and restore safety to the streets. On the other hand, investigations into the Daniels gang were often compromised. Some officers were bribed to ignore evidence, while others were threatened or intimidated into silence. This corruption created a frustrating cycle. The public demanded justice, but the system meant to provide it was tangled in the very crimes it was supposed to stop. Honest police officers struggled to do their jobs, often working in secret and risking their careers to gather evidence. At the same time, the city's political leaders were under pressure. Some had connections to the gangs either through corruption or personal interest, while others were caught between wanting to clean up the city and fearing the consequences of standing up to powerful criminal force. Community leaders, activists, and journalists tried to expose the truth, but their efforts were met with resistance. Threats, violence, and intimidation silenced many who tried to speak out. The city's corruption ran deep, making it hard to tell friend from foe. Among the ordinary people, fear and uncertainty were growing. Everyone knew someone affected by the gangs, whether a relative caught up in crime, a friend threatened into silence, or a neighbor who had been a victim of violence. Rumors spread quickly about planned attacks, police raids, and secret deals. People whispered about the possibility of a gang war, but most hoped it wouldn't come to that. The idea of open conflict terrified them because it promised nothing but destruction and death. Despite this fear, some parts of the city held on to hope. Local organizations worked quietly to support families, provide alternatives for young people, and build community strength. These efforts, however, were small compared to the vast power of the gangs and the corruption that protected them. The city's future felt uncertain, caught in a dangerous balance between control and chaos. In the background, the Daniels gang remained watchful. Daniels himself rarely appeared in public, but his influence was everywhere. His trusted lieutenants kept close eyes on rivals and made sure the gang stayed united. Yet even with all the precautions, there was a growing sense of vulnerability. The leader's enemies were becoming bolder, and the pressures on the gang were mounting. The city was like a powder keg, waiting for the smallest spark to ignite a full-blown explosion. As the tension built, everyone waited for that spark. It came unexpectedly and violently, shaking the city to its core and plunging it into a conflict far worse than anyone could have imagined. The days of uneasy peace were over. What followed would change the city forever and reveal the true cost of power, loyalty, and betrayal in the dangerous world of gang. It was a day that would forever be etched in the memories of the city's residents, a bright, seemingly ordinary afternoon that turned deadly in an instant. Daniels, the elusive leader of the Daniels gang, was moving through a busy market district. Despite his notoriety, he often chose to travel discreetly, avoiding the usual displays of power that many gang leaders favored. That day, he walked among the crowd, blending in with shoppers and street vendors. No one could have predicted that the calm would be shattered so suddenly. Suddenly, the sharp sound of gunfire pierced the air. Panic erupted as people scattered, ducking behind stalls and running for safety. A figure had stepped out from a black car parked nearby, quickly pulling a weapon and firing multiple rounds directly at Daniel. The attack was swift and precise, leaving no time for escape. Witnesses later described seeing Daniels fall to the ground, lifeless, before help could arrive. The killer vanished into the chaos, leaving behind stunned bystanders and a city gripped by shock. The assassination was unlike anything the city had seen before. Daniels had been considered nearly untouchable, protected by layers of loyal bodyguards and informants. The fact that someone managed to kill him in broad daylight, in the heart of the city, sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld and law enforcement alike. The murder raised countless questions. Who had the power and boldness to carry out such a brazen attack? Was it the work of a rival gang, or was there a darker, more complicated story behind it? In the immediate aftermath, the city descended into confusion and fear. News of Daniel's death spread rapidly, sparking rumors and speculation on every street corner. Some believed it was the start of a full-scale gang war, while others thought it might be an inside job. The gang itself was thrown into disarray. Daniels had been the glue holding everything together. Without his leadership, the once tightly controlled organization was vulnerable, exposed to threats both outside and within. The police launched an intense investigation, but progress was slow. Witnesses were terrified to come forward, fearing retaliation. Evidence was scarce, and the trail quickly grew cold. The layers of corruption protecting the gang meant that even some officers were hesitant to pursue leads aggressively. Many suspected that someone high up in the police force, or political circles, might have been involved or at least aware of the plan. This suspicion only deepened the sense of distrust between the public and those sworn to protect them. Meanwhile, rival gangs began to move. Daniel's death created a power vacuum that ignited fierce competition. Some factions saw this as the perfect opportunity to claim parts of the Daniels gang's territory and expand their own influence. Violent clashes erupted across the city, with gunfights and attacks becoming more frequent and deadly. The fragile peace that had held for years was shattered, replaced by chaos and bloodshed. Inside the Daniels gang, tensions skyrocketed. Without Daniels' steady hand, old rivalries and ambitions resurfaced. Lieutenants who once worked side by side now eyed each other with suspicion, each wondering who would take control. Trust dissolved quickly, and whispers of betrayal filled the ranks. Some members believed the assassination was orchestrated by one of their own, a plan to seize power by eliminating the leader. The idea that the gang could be tearing itself apart from within was terrifying but hard to ignore. At the same time, the city's residents felt the impact immediately. The market where Daniels was killed became a grim symbol of the violence engulfing the streets. Businesses shut down, and many people chose to leave their homes, unwilling to risk being caught in the crossfire. The sense of safety vanished, replaced by fear and uncertainty. The city's vibrant life slowed, overshadowed by the growing violence and the deadly consequences of power struggles. The assassination of Daniels marked a turning point. What had been a secretive and controlled criminal empire was now exposed to the chaos of competing interests and hidden agendas. It wasn't just a gang leader who was lost that day, it was a fragile balance that had kept violence in check. With Daniels gone, the city was hurtling toward an unpredictable and dangerous future. In the weeks that followed, every corner of the city felt the ripple effect. Alliances shifted, new enemies emerged, and long-hidden secrets began to surface. The murder was only the beginning of a story filled with betrayal, ambition, and a deadly fight for control that would shake the city to its core. The question on everyone's mind was simple but terrifying: who would be next? In the days following Daniels' assassination, the once tightly knit Daniels gang began to unravel. The shock of losing their leader so violently exposed deep fractures beneath the surface, fractures that had been growing quietly for months if not years. Loyalty, which had been the gang's foundation, suddenly felt fragile. Members who once stood shoulder to shoulder now eyed each other with suspicion, wondering who might have been involved in the deadly betrayal. The assassination of Daniels marked a turning point. What had been a secretive and controlled criminal empire was now exposed to the chaos of competing interests and hidden agendas. It wasn't just a gang leader who was lost that day, it was a fragile balance that had kept violence in check. With Daniels gone, the city was hurtling toward an unpredictable and dangerous future. In the weeks that followed, every corner of the city felt the ripple effect. Alliances shifted, new enemies emerged, and long-hidden secrets began to surface. The murder was only the beginning of a story filled with betrayal, ambition, and a deadly fight for control that would shake the city to its core. The question on everyone's mind was simple but terrifying: who would be next? In the days following Daniels' assassination, the once tightly knit Daniels gang began to unravel. The shock of losing their leader so violently exposed deep fractures beneath the surface, fractures that had been growing quietly for months if not years. Loyalty, which had been the gang's foundation, suddenly felt fragile. Members who once stood shoulder to shoulder now eyed each other with suspicion, wondering who might have been involved in the deadly betrayal. The gang's unity, carefully maintained by Daniels' iron grip, was gone, and the consequences were swift and brutal. Investigators digging into the case quickly realized this murder wasn't just the result of a typical gang rivalry. Evidence started to point to betrayals from within the Daniels gang itself. Surveillance footage, intercepted phone calls, and informants' testimonies revealed secret meetings between some of Daniels' closest lieutenants and rival gang leaders. These meetings had been kept hidden from the majority of the gang and from Daniels himself. The betrayal was deeper and more complex than anyone had anticipated. The discovery shocked law enforcement and the public alike. It was one thing for rival gangs to clash violently over territory or money. It was something else entirely to find that trusted members of the Daniels gang had conspired with enemies. This hidden alliance suggested a calculated plan to overthrow Daniels and take control of the gang's empire. The scale of the treachery suggested a slow, patient strategy that had been years in the making, waiting for the right moment to strike. Inside the gang, paranoia spread quickly. Leaders who had once been Daniels' loyal allies found themselves accused of treason. Friendships shattered as members turned on each other, unsure who to trust. Some fled, fearing for their lives. Others prepared for violent confrontations. The internal conflict was as dangerous as the external threats from rival gangs. The gang's strength depended on unity, and now that unity was shattered, the police capitalized on the chaos. With informants coming forward, they began to uncover more about the gang's inner working. Names surfaced, members who had played double roles, secretly feeding information to rivals or corrupt officials. The layers of deception were complex, making it difficult to determine who was truly loyal and who was a traitor. Every new piece of evidence painted a picture of a gang on the brink of collapse. Meanwhile, the rival gangs sensed the opportunity. They stepped up their attacks, confident that the Daniels gang was vulnerable. Turf wars erupted across the city, bringing violence to streets that had been relatively calm under Daniels' rule. These conflicts often spilled into public spaces, putting innocent lives at risk. The police struggled to contain the violence, but corruption and fear hampered their effort. The city seemed to be slipping into a downward spiral. Amid the chaos, the public's trust in both the gang and law enforcement eroded further. People questioned how such a powerful organization could be undone by internal betrayal, and why the police had taken so long to uncover the truth. The betrayal from within was a betrayal of the entire community, one that revealed the dark, hidden forces that influenced the gang's power. It was a reminder that what happened on the streets was connected to secret deals and shadowy figures behind the scenes. As the Daniels gang splintered, some members began to form new alliances, hoping to survive the violent upheaval. Others attempted to seize control of the gang's fractured territories, leading to brutal power struggles. The sense of an unstoppable gang empire was gone. In its place was a violent scramble for dominance, fueled by greed, fear, and revenge. The betrayal also revealed a dangerous truth. The gang war wasn't just a battle for territory or money, it was a fight for survival. Members who had once been united under Daniels' leadership now faced the reality that they might be expendable pawns in a larger game. The lines between friend and foe blurred, and trust became a rare commodity. Every decision carried life or death consequence. What started as a straightforward murder investigation soon turned into a complex web of deception and intrigue. The story of Daniel's death was no longer just about a gang leader being killed, it was about the unraveling of an empire from the inside out. The city watched as the once feared Daniel's gang fell apart, exposing secrets that many had tried to keep buried. In the shadows, new players moved quietly, waiting to take advantage of the gang's collapse. The betrayal had changed everything. The war for control had just begun. As the dust settled on the initial shock of Daniel's assassination and the gang's internal betrayal, investigators uncovered an even more startling revelation: a secret alliance between the Daniels gang's most dangerous rival. What at first seemed like a simple gang rivalry had morphed into a carefully orchestrated plan involving multiple factions working together behind closed doors. This covert alliance was more than a desperate attempt to seize territory. It was a strategic move that threatened to reshape the entire criminal landscape of the city. For years, rival gangs had openly clashed with the Daniels gang, competing for control over neighborhoods, drug routes, and illegal markets. But beneath the surface, some leaders had begun meeting in secret, recognizing that their individual chances of overthrowing Daniels alone were slim. By joining forces, they believed they could dismantle the Daniels gang from within and claim its lucrative empire for themselves. This alliance was fragile and full of mistrust, but the common goal of taking down Daniels and his organization held them together. The most shocking aspect of this alliance was the involvement of certain Daniels lieutenants who had turned their backs on their leader. These high-ranking members, once trusted to enforce Daniel's rule, had been secretly negotiating with rival factions for months. Their betrayal was motivated by ambition, greed, and fear of being left behind in a rapidly changing underworld. By collaborating with Daniel's enemies, they aimed to secure their own survival and position once the leader was gone. Evidence emerged of secret meetings in hidden locations, abandoned warehouses, backrooms of clubs, and private homes, where rival leaders and turncoats from the Daniels gang planned their move. These gatherings were shrouded in secrecy, with encrypted communications and trusted couriers, ensuring no information leaked. The careful coordination allowed them to time Daniels' assassination. Amid the growing chaos of the gang war and the shocking revelations of corruption, unexpected players began to emerge from the shadows, complicating the conflict even further. These were individuals and groups, not traditionally associated with gang activity, but who saw the turmoil as an opportunity to influence the city's future, either for personal gain or to pursue their own agendas. Their involvement added a new layer of intrigue and danger, transforming the gang war into something far more complex than anyone had anticipated. One such group was a network of underground fixers and brokers, people who thrived in the gray areas between legality and criminality. These fixers were specialists in manipulating situations behind the scenes. They arranged secret meetings, brokered deals, and coordinated alliances among rival factions. Their knowledge of the city's hidden connections made them valuable to both gang leaders and corrupt officials. Unlike the gang members who fought openly, these players operated quietly, pulling strings without drawing attention to themselves. These fixers often had connections to the political and business elite. They used their influence to shape outcomes that benefited their clients. Whether it was securing contracts, influencing law enforcement decisions, or manipulating public opinion through media outlets. Their involvement suggested that the gang war was not just a local dispute, but part of a broader power struggle involving multiple layers of society. They understood that the conflict could be exploited to consolidate power or eliminate obstacles. In addition to fixers, a new breed of opportunists appeared. Individuals who had previously kept a low profile but now saw the gang war as a chance to rise. Former gang members who had left the life behind were drawn back in, some motivated by revenge, others by the promise of wealth or influence. These players were unpredictable, often acting independently or shifting loyalties rapidly. Their re-entry into the violent world destabilized the delicate balance between factions, increasing the risk of sudden and brutal confrontations. Some community leaders and activists also emerged as unexpected players. They sought to intervene and reduce violence, organizing peace talks, community patrols, and outreach programs aimed at young people vulnerable to gang recruitment. Their efforts were met with mixed reactions. Some gangs saw them as threats to be eliminated while others viewed them as potential allies. These peacemakers operated in a dangerous space, trying to bridge gaps in a city increasingly divided by violence and mistrust. Even within law enforcement, new faces emerged. A small group of dedicated officers frustrated by corruption and violence began working covertly to dismantle the gangs and expose corrupt officials. These officers risked their careers and lives using undercover operations and confidential informants to gather crucial intelligence. Their actions were vital in revealing some of the secret dealings and betrayals, but their efforts were often hampered by the very system they sought to reform. The involvement of these unexpected players complicated the gang war's dynamics. The conflict was no longer just about turf or revenge. It became a multifaceted battle involving secret alliances, shifting loyalties and hidden motives. The lines between friend and foe blurred as these new actors influenced the direction and intensity of the violence. For the city's residents, this made the situation even more unpredictable and frightening. Behind the scenes, these players negotiated and schemed, each trying to outmaneuver the others. Some fixers facilitated deals to maintain temporary peace, or brokered power-sharing agreements. Others stoked violence to weaken rivals or send messages. Opportunists exploited chaos to build their own influence, while community activists fought to restore order and protect vulnerable populations. Law enforcement agents worked tirelessly to gather evidence and bring justice, despite the obstacles they faced. The presence of these unexpected players revealed how deeply the gang war had penetrated the city's fabric. The conflict was no longer confined to criminal gangs. It had become a battleground for influence touching every part of society. The involvement of these diverse actors highlighted the complexity of the struggle and the high stakes for everyone involved. As the gang war continued to spiral, the city found itself caught in a web of alliances and betrayals that extended far beyond the street. The battle for control was no longer a simple fight between rival gangs. It was a complex game involving secret operators, hidden agendas and unexpected alliances. Each new player brought their own motives and methods, making the conflict harder to predict and even more dangerous. The story of Daniel's death had evolved into a vast and tangled drama, with many more players than anyone could have imagined. Understanding who held the true power in this deadly game required looking beyond the obvious. It meant uncovering the hidden forces shaping the conflict, forces that threatened to control the city's future for years to come. As the gang war raged on and hidden players maneuvered behind the scenes, the violence reached a terrifying new level, forcing the city to reckon with the devastating human cost. What began as a battle for power among criminal factions quickly spiraled into widespread chaos, with innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. Streets once lively and bustling became battlegrounds marked by fear, destruction, and loss. Neighborhoods long controlled by the Daniels gang became scenes of daily violence. Gunfire echoed through residential areas, shattering windows and traumatizing families. Businesses shuttered their doors or relocated as owners feared extortion or being caught between rival gangs. Community centers, once safe havens for children and the elderly, became no-go zones. The fabric of these communities began to tear apart, leaving residents isolated and vulnerable. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of the conflict was the impact on children and young people. Many grew up surrounded by violence, poverty and mistrust. Some were drawn into gang life as a means of survival, while others became unintended victims. Schools faced disruptions from fights and threats, with some students dropping out or moving away. The cycle of violence threatened to consume a whole generation, making the city's future uncertain. Emergency services struggled to cope. Hospitals saw a surge in gunshot wounds and violent injuries, stretching resources. Paramedics and doctors worked under intense pressure, often witnessing the harsh realities of the gang war firsthand. Police officers found themselves not only fighting crime but also managing public panic and protecting vulnerable communities. The strain on these services revealed how deeply the violence had penetrated everyday life. Public fear was palpable. People avoided going out after dark, wary of becoming victims of random violence or mistaken identity. Many reported hearing frequent gunshots and explosions, describing sleepless nights filled with anxiety. Neighborhood watch groups formed and some residents took up arms to defend their homes, escalating tensions further. The sense of normal life being shattered created a collective trauma that would take years to heal. In response, local government and community organizations attempted to intervene. Initiatives focused on providing safe spaces, job training and counseling aimed at steering youth away from gang. Outreach workers engaged directly with at-risk individuals, trying to offer alternatives. While these efforts brought hope to some, the scale of the problem and the depth of mistrust made progress slow and difficult. The media covered the violence extensively, often highlighting the most shocking incidents. Graphic footage and detailed reports drew national attention, putting pressure on authorities to act. Yet some critics accused the media of sensationalizing the conflict, arguing that this only fueled fear and stigmatized entire communities. Balancing accurate reporting with sensitivity became a challenge for journalists covering the ongoing crisis. Amid the chaos, stories of resilience and courage emerged. Community members banded together to protect each other, organize peace marches and demand change. Some former gang members turned their lives around, working as mentors or mediators to prevent further violence. These efforts underscored a determination to reclaim neighborhoods from the grip of fear and violence. However, the gang war showed few signs of ending. The deaths of gang leaders, shifting alliances and the involvement of corrupt officials and unexpected players made a resolution seem distant. Each violent incident sparked retaliation, creating a cycle that fed on itself. The city was trapped in a downward spiral where hope was often overshadowed by despair. The devastating toll of the gang war forced a reckoning with difficult questions. How had a criminal conflict grown so large and destructive? What roles did corruption and betrayal play in prolonging the violence? And most importantly, how could the city heal from the wounds inflicted on its people and reclaim its future? As the battle for control continued, the suffering of innocent civilians became impossible to ignore. The gang war was no longer just a story about crime and power. It was a human tragedy unfolding in real time. The streets bore the scars and the people carried the pain, reminding everyone that behind the headlines were lives forever changed. In the midst of destruction and despair, the city faced a critical crossroad. The path forward required confronting the deep-rooted issues that had allowed the gang war to escalate, rebuilding trust within communities, and rooting out the corruption that had enabled violence to flourish. The outcome would shape not just the future of the gangs but the fate of the city itself. The human cost of the Daniels gang war was a stark reminder that the consequences of crime extend far beyond the criminals themselves. It was a call to action, a demand that the hidden powers behind the violence be exposed and that peace be restored before more lives were lost. As the gang war intensified and the city struggled under the weight of violence and corruption, a shocking and unexpected twist emerged. One that turned the investigation on its head and forced everyone to question who really held the power behind the scenes. This revelation revealed that the assassination of Daniels and the ensuing chaos were not merely the results of gang rivalries and internal betrayals but were part of a much larger, more sinister plan involving high-profile figures operating in the shadows. Investigators, driven by mounting pressure and fresh intelligence, uncovered evidence suggesting that Daniels' assassination had been orchestrated by a covert cabal composed of influential individuals from different sectors of society. This group had carefully manipulated events to destabilize the criminal underworld and seize control of key assets and political influence. Their motives were far from straightforward. They sought to reshape the city's power dynamics, ensuring their dominance remained unchallenged while masking their involvement behind the facade of gang violence. This cabal included business moguls with investments tied to the city's real estate and infrastructure, politicians looking to consolidate their political base, and law enforcement officials who used their authority to facilitate criminal enterprises and suppress rivals. Each member had a vested interest in the outcome of the gang war, and their collaboration created a powerful hidden network that extended well beyond the public eye. What made this revelation so disturbing was how deeply the cabal had infiltrated the city's institutions. Corrupt officers deliberately sabotaged investigations that threatened their allies, while politicians manipulated funding and law enforcement priorities to serve their agenda. Business leaders funneled money through front companies to support the cabal's activity.